I always keep forgetting this, and sir reminds me of it. Fine, we started recording and we'll proceed with the class. So we were discussing the fourth question in the series of second part for the PPH. So here, as we were discussing, it is the answer here is mifepristone, right? So remember, mifepristone is it is also called as, what is the other name for mifepristone? Anybody knows it? Anybody can tell me what is the other name for mifepristone or the chemical name? Anybody? I've just written one alphabet here. R. It's called RU486. Okay. It's also called as RU486. And mifepristone, it is used most commonly in the medical abortion, in the medical management of MTP, or even in case of missed abortion, or even for an MTP, mifepristone is used most commonly in the dosage of 200 milligrams. So whenever we want to give a medical kit for MTP, that can be done within 7 weeks of gestation. We give a combination of mifepristone that is given as 200 milligram stat, followed by misoprostol is given after 48 hours in a dose of 800 micrograms. Okay, so mifepristone is also called RU486, and most commonly it is used for a medical MTP. And sometimes nowadays there are studies where it is being used for even fibroid uterus, as a medical management, as a conservative management. But the long-term studies have not yet come. But remember that it is not used for postpartum hemorrhage. Okay, so don't confuse between mifepristone and misoprostol. Right, so there is a confusion here, but remember, misoprostol is PGE1, and that comes in the form of tablet, and it is used for PPH, whereas mifepristone, also called as RU486, it is used for a medical MTP. So is it clear to all of you?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Fine. We'll go to the next question. Now, treatment of postpartum hemorrhage is all except oxytocin, symptometrin, estrogen, prostaglandins. Quick
Estrogen.
answer. Yes, of course, estrogen, is it not? Because as we discussed, the first line drugs are the oxytocin. Then you have the symptometrin, which is a combination of oxytocin and methergine, and prostaglandins, of course, are used as the second line drugs. In the prostaglandins, we have carboprost and misoprostol. Estrogen is not the one which is used for PPH, and therefore that's the answer for this question. Fine. Now, again, the same question is repeated almost. Which of the drug is not commonly used in PPH? Mifepristone, misoprostol, oxytocin, ergotamine.
Option A.
Fine. Right. Massive PPH may warrant following interventions: hysterectomy, thermal endometrial ablation, internal iliac artery ligation, balloon tamponade, and uterine artery embolization. See, I can give you a hint here that the answer is multiple choice here. Multiple answers are correct. It's one of the questions in PGI. So remember, in the PGI, there is always multiple answers will be right options. You have to think about every option and tick them properly. Tick all the right options. You have to tick all the right options, is it not? So here, amongst the 5 options, which of the following are the interventions in massive PPH? So
option A.
Yeah, A is hysterectomy. It is a option in case of massive PPH. Of course, we do it especially in a patient who has completed her family and to save the life of the mother. Hysterectomy is the right option. Thermal endometrial ablation is it an option? Thermal endometrial ablation for control of the PPH? No, is it not? Because in case of massive PPH, most of the times it is atonic PPH, and thermal ablation alone wouldn't control the bleeding there. And then you do not have a time or a risk to take for a very small conservative procedure. Okay, so that's why thermal ablation is not an option for PPH, whereas it can be done for an abnormal uterine bleeding in a gynecological setup, where there is no other possible cause for abnormal uterine bleeding, like fibroid uterus or an adenomyosis, something like that. If it's only because of a hormonal problem, then thermal endometrial ablation can be used as a treatment for AUB or abnormal uterine bleeding, but not for PPH. So that's not an option. Then you have C, that is internal iliac artery ligation. It's done in massive PPH, yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
It is done, is it not? So especially to save the uterus. And just before you actually go for hysterectomy, you always try for an internal artery ligation in a massive PPH. So this is the right option. Balloon tamponade.
No. Yes.
Balloon tamponade, yes, I will say here because see, in case of massive PPH, before you actually shift the patient for internal iliac artery or a hysterectomy, or if you do not have a facility for such, then you go ahead with a balloon tamponade first. Okay, you try with the balloon tamponade and then try to buy the time to shift the patient to a higher center where it can be done, where the other advanced procedures can be done. So balloon tamponade is also a right option where it is one of the interventions done in massive PPH. Okay. Then of course, uterine artery embolization, as we discussed, if you have the facility, this is also one of the best non-invasive options for the patient. Okay. So these are right options for this particular answer. It's all clear to you? That no doubt?
Yes, ma'am.
Fine, we'll go ahead with the next one. A Breland suture is applied on cervix, uterus, fallopian tube, or ovaries. It's a very easy answer. Uterus. So you all are well versed with the Breland suture, is it not? So it's just done on the uterus to control the postpartum hemorrhage. It's a kind of a compression suture. We'll discuss about that in future slide. There's another question on B Lynch. True regarding PPH. Type B Lynch suture is used. B option. With new advances, both atonic and traumatic PPH can be reduced. C, more common in multipara. D is associated with polyhydramnios. E, mifepristone is used. It's again a PGI question where you have multiple right answers. So you will have to select all the right answers. So we have to go one by one. Now A, option A, type B Lynch suture is used.
Yes.
Yeah, that is true. Then B, with new advances, both atonic and traumatic PPH can be reduced.
Yes.
Yes.
But they have not mentioned any specific answer here, new advances.
Yeah.
And one method will not kind of control both the kind of PPH, atonic and traumatic both. Only, of course, these procedures like internal bilateral ligation or even the bilateral internal iliac artery embolization. So these procedures can control both, but then this is a little not a clear-cut option here for this question. So we will just hold on this. Okay. So I would take this as the right and we'll just hold on this answer. C option, more common in multipara. It is true. Associated with polyhydramnios.
Yes, ma'am.
True. Then is mifepristone used here?
False. No, ma'am.
False, is it not? So this is not an option. So yes, new advances like the procedures as we discussed, especially bilateral internal iliac artery ligation and embolization can be used to treat both atonic as well as traumatic PPH. So all these four options are right except for the last option. So is it clear to all of you?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. We'll go to the next question. A 30-year-old Gravida 3 Para 2 woman with a history of hypertension presents to the birthing floor in labor. Following a prolonged labor and delivery with no fetal complications, she continues to bleed vaginally but remains afebrile. On bimanual examination, her uterus is soft, boggy, and enlarged. There are no visible lacerations. Uterine massage only slightly decreases the hemorrhage and oxytocin is only mildly effective. Which of the following is the next best step in management? Okay, so understand the scenario here and understand the question. They have given her certain drugs and they're asking which is the next step, okay, in line. So the options given here is DNC, A, B is PGF2 alpha, that is carboprost injection, C is methyl ergometrin, that is methergine, D is misoprostol, E is platelet transfusion. So given
Option
the
B, ma'am.
situation, sorry.
Option B, carboprost.
B.
Yeah, so that would be the most appropriate
Second.
answer here, as you have suggested, because you know what you can understand from this situation or the question here is that the patient is having PPH. Okay, one is for sure. She's bleeding. She continues to bleed. So she has there is a PPH. Okay, agree?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
next thing, what you do once there is a PPH, always, as I told, put your hand on the uterus and see if it is contracted or no. So here they have done the same thing, and they have also given the situation that the uterus was soft, boggy, and enlarged. That means it is which kind of PPH?
Tonic.
Atonic.
Atonic PPH, of course. So once you know that it is an atonic PPH, what you do is start simultaneously multiple things. You try to give us oxytocics, you try to massage the uterus continuously, right? So the same thing they've done uterine massage and they've given oxytocin, which has but what they've found is that it's only mildly effective. So then they are supposed to do a next intervention, and that is what they're asking. So ideally, as we discussed in the PPH, there's a stepwise management. So you escalate the oxytocics. Okay, you start with oxytocin. If she doesn't respond, you start with a higher dose of oxytocin, and then if she doesn't respond to that, you start with the next options of higher oxytocics, that is the prostaglandins. Okay, so as I told, immediate prostaglandin, which is available and can be given as the PGF2 alpha or carboprost. So that is the next intervention which is supposed to be done in this kind of a situation, and this will be the right answer for that. Okay, so DNC is out of question, as we understand that you know the condition here is an atonic PPH and it's not a retained products of placenta, so DNC is out of option. Methyl ergometrin, we kind of restrict the use of this nowadays, and try to give or try to we have preference to PGF2 alpha than methyl ergometrin, so that's why this will be the right option. Methyl ergometrin is also a wonderful drug, but it is guarded. It might cause some complications, especially hypertension, and you know, even sometimes it will even cause severe contraction of the uterus, and that's why we try to avoid. And first choice would be the carboprost and then methyl ergometrin. Then of course misoprost is immediately it will not have an action on the uterus. Misoprostol, it will have a prolonged sustained action because it comes in the form of a tablet. Okay, so the onset of action is not immediate in case of misoprostol. So we do not rely immediately on the misoprostol, though we start off misoprostol also along with the PGF2 alpha. We either give it orally or parectally. Okay, so platelet transfusion is of course not needed in this case because she's still not in a state of shock or anything. So when you analyze all these options, the appropriate option, as we discussed and you all rightly said, is the B, that is PGF2 alpha. So it's clear to all of you?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Fine, we'll go ahead with the next question. True about placenta accreta is, it is seen in cesarean scar. B, removal should be done under GA in piecemeal. C, chorionic villi invade serosa. D, it is an etiological factor for amniotic fluid embolism. Anybody for this answer? So placenta accreta means when the placenta is invading the decidua basalis of the
Basic.
uterus, is it not? So it is still, excuse me, not into the myometrium of the uterus. Okay, it is still before the myometrium. That is called as placenta accreta. And once we analyzed all the causes or the possible risk factors for placenta accreta, we have understood that any scar on the uterus could predispose the placenta to be converting into placenta accreta, like multiple DNCs, uterine, procedures like synecholysis or ediciolysis in the uterine cavity, or even cesarean scar. So when you analyze the first option, it is seen in cesarean scar is true, is it not, for the placenta accreta? Because it is more common when there is a breach in the endometrial cavity or endometrial lining of the uterus in procedures as we discussed. So first option is actually a true option. Do you all agree with me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So once we have kind of found that this option is right, let us keep it here, but let us look at the other options as well. B, removal should be done under GA in piecemeal. Is it a right option? How do you manage placenta accreta? Yeah, we have to try and remove it as much as possible. But remember, most of the times it is adherent very badly. And if you try to remove it, you'll end up in either rupture or, um, uh, traumatic or even traumatic PPH or atonic PPH sometimes. So what we do usually in placenta accreta is we try to remove as much as possible. And then whatever the leftover is managed by conservatively, either by observing her or giving drugs like methotrexate, which will kind of act as a chemotherapeutic agent on the trophoblastic tissues and help in disintegration of the left out placental or the trophoblastic tissue. So that's how is the management of placenta accreta, and removal under GA piecemeal is not followed nowadays in the modern obstetrics. So that's not an option. The third option is completely wrong, is it not? See, chorionic villi here, it will invade only the decidua basalis. It
Basalis.
doesn't extend up to the myometrium and the serosa of the uterus. So that is a wrong option here. So which is the terminology used when the placenta is invading the serosa?
For Krita.
Creta, correct. So that is the wrong option here. And it is an etiological factor for amniotic fluid embolism is also a wrong option. So there is nothing like placenta accreta predisposes for amniotic fluid embolism. Okay. So the answer here is A for this question, right? Next one, which is not a common cause of placenta accreta. Understand the question, which is not a common cause. So you'll have to rule out
Previous placenta previa.
Um, let me read the options. A is previous LSCS, previous curettage, previous myomectomy, and previous placenta previa or abruption. So the answer here, as she rightly said, is D. Okay. So as we all remember, any scar on the uterus in the form of LSCS, curettage, or myomectomy will predispose for placenta accreta. So all these are, the conditions predisposing to placenta accreta except this one. So placenta previa abruption do not leave a scar behind there. So that's why we do not have a recurrence or a predisposing factor for placenta accreta. So that's how you can understand this question, right? So we'll move ahead. Placenta accreta is associated with placenta previa, uterine scar, multiple pregnancy, multipara, and uterine malformation. Here again, it's a PGI question. Remember, there are multiple right answers here. As we discussed, any of these could be the predisposing factor for placenta accreta. Yes, which are the options? Right options here. B, uterine scar, of course. Is it not? Which are the other right options you feel?
E.
Uterine malformation. Uterine malformation could be yes, and even multipara. Okay, multipara also will have a risk for placenta accreta because there is a thinning of the uterine wall because of multiple stretching and multiple deliveries, and she might be prone for placenta accreta. So these are three important options of predisposing factors for placenta accreta. Okay. Now, next question. Minimum duration between onset of symptoms and death is seen in which condition? That means once there is a onset of symptom and the patient suddenly collapses and she'll end up, in a death very quickly. Like we don't have much time to kind of resuscitate and treat her. So, which is that condition? APH, PPH, septicemia, or obstructed labor? Septicemia, no, I wouldn't agree with that. Why do you think septicemia? See, septicemia means when there is a ensuing infection and it has kind of spread into the intravascular system as well, is it not? The toxemia or the septicemia is there in the intravascular system and it is spread throughout the body. But once you have diagnosed, you do have a time there, at least, depending on how the interventions are given, patient will survive up till even 48 hours or weeks together also sometimes if she is on antibiotics, is it not? So here the onset of symptoms to the time of the death is not short or is not lesser. But which is that condition where we absolutely have no time? Patient might collapse within, hours if you don't intervene.
Obstructed labor, ma'am.
Obstructed labor, see, what is the definition for obstructed labor? Anybody? So when you call it as an obstructed labor, see, obstructed labor means the labor is standstill in any of the stages. It could be either in the first stage, second stage, or the third stage. Usually in the second stage of labor, not the third stage. So the obstructed labor is defined when the labor is standstill for more than 2 hours. Okay, so more than 2 hours, if the same status persists in the form of non-descent of the fetal head or the uterine contractions are not kind of adequate for the labor or the delivery, in such conditions, the definition, it is 2 hours. So you have 2 hours there, right? So whereas a condition such as in PPH, okay, even sometimes the patient collapses within minutes, and especially when there is an atonic PPH and if she's pouring like a tap, so that is a situation where you hardly have any time. And if she's not intervened within even an hour, she collapses sometimes and dies. Okay, so obstructed labor definition wise, she still has time, like almost 2 hours. But most of the times nowadays, we don't allow her to be obstructed for more than 2 hours. If there is no progress clinically, when we assess for more than 1 hour, we don't delay it further, right? We kind of intervene and go ahead with the cesarean section. Whereas the answer for this question, as we have been discussing, it's actually PPH. Okay, so postpartum hemorrhage is a condition where the duration between the onset of the symptoms and death can be very, very short. And the patient usually collapses within few minutes or even a few hours. Okay, so the answer here is PPH. So do you all agree with me?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. So there is no benefit of doubt or any doubt in this, is it not? So we'll go
No
ahead
doubt,
with the
ma'am.
next question.
Ma'am,
Fifth,
ma'am, I have a
yes,
doubt.
yes, please.
Ma'am, in abruptio placenta, can it
Hmm.
cause shock? So,
Yeah, abruptio placenta also can be a condition where there could be a collapse and the patient might end up. But remember here in abruptio placentae, the blood loss here occurs. It is because of the placental detachment. Okay, and most of the times, the immediate to the first event of placental detachment will kind of probably drain her, or the blood loss will be in about 1,000 ml or something like that, depending on how big is the retroplacental clot or the bleeding. Again, in APH or abruptio placentae, the most common cause of death. Okay, once the patient goes into abruption, she ends up in a complication, what we call it as a consumptive coagulopathy or a DIC. Okay, so DIC again will cause her a predilection to postpartum hemorrhage. Understood? So abruption or APH as such, in placenta previa or even in abruptio placentae, you will still have time. So once it is diagnosed, immediately you can intervene. But the death which is caused even in abruptio placentae, most of the times it is because of DIC, which is again leading to PPH. So this is how you can reason and say that amongst these options, whatever they have given here, the minimum duration where that is where the death is occurring faster is PPH than APH. Did you get
okay.
that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So I hope it's clear.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, fine. We'll move on to the next question then.
Yes, ma'am.
15. A patient went into shock immediately after normal delivery. What is the likely cause? Amniotic fluid embolism, PPH, uterine inversion, or eclampsia?
PPH.
Yeah, this question is confusing in the sense it's not very clearly, they've not given the clinical scenario very clearly. In fact, any of these three options could be the right options, what I feel here. Okay, so patient amniotic fluid embolism, as we discussed in the previous APH classes, it's most commonly seen following the delivery of the placenta. Is it not during the labor course or immediately after delivery? So here again, what they've given is immediately after normal delivery. So amniotic fluid embolism could be a cause for the patient going into shock immediately after normal delivery. Then PPH is also a possible cause here, is it not? So immediately after delivery, the patient might end up with atonic PPH and she might go into shock. Uterine inversion is also a possible cause here. So immediately, most of the times when we have already discussed, uterine inversion occurs most of the times immediately after delivery. It's most of the times an acute event. Okay, especially after delivery of the placenta, and if there is a mishandling of the placenta and there is an atonic uterus and you just pull on the placenta lower down, then it will end up in the uterine inversion immediately after delivery. So all the three are the right answers for this question actually. So it's quite confusing. Remember, it could be any of these three will be the right answer. Eclampsia is unlikely because they have told that the shock immediately after normal delivery, and usually the patient will not collapse as in the normal delivery after eclampsia. So this is not the right answer. Whereas these three could be conditions where the patient can have shock immediately after delivery. Okay. So we'll go to the next one. Now, all of the following drugs are used for prevention and treatment of PPH except. This is again the repeat question. It seems to be a very favorite question. Most of the times because students keep confusing between misoprostol and mifepristone. Okay, so anyway, you won't have any doubt between the oxytocin, ergometrine, and carboprost. So always there is a doubt between, confusion between mifepristone and misoprostol. So remember, it's always mifepristone, which is not the drug used in PPH. It is RU486, and it is used for, as I told, medical MTP rather than PPH. Okay. Next one. A female presents with significant blood loss due to postpartum hemorrhage. What would be the shock index? That is heart rate by systolic blood pressure. A 0.7 to 0.9, 0.5 to 0.7, 0.9 to 1.1, or 0.1 to 0.5. Anybody who can remember?
Option C, ma'am.
0.9 to 1.
0.9
Yeah,
to 1.
correct.
Option C.
Correct. So whenever the obstetric index or the shock index is more than 1 or more than 0.9 is what indicates that the PPH is a severe PPH and she'll need blood transfusions, and therefore the blood has to be arranged immediately. So this is the right answer. Whereas 0.7 to 0.9 is the normal range of the shock, the index, the obstetric index. Okay. So the answer here is 0.9 to 1.1. Correct. Next one. The following statements are related to obstetric inversion. It is usually insidious in onset. It is usually acute. It is usually incomplete, and in majority, it is spontaneous in nature. Anybody?
Option B, ma'am. It is usually
Yeah,
acute.
correct. That is the right answer here. See, A option is not the right option because it is not insidious in the sense there will be usually some cause for it, to occur, either the mishandling of third stage of labor or atonic PPH or something like that. So option A is not the right answer, and it is usually acute. As we discussed, there is a sudden, most of the times, inversion is usually acute. So it's a one-time immediate event. So that is the right answer. And it is usually incomplete. We cannot say, most of the times it is complete. So that's also the wrong option here. And it is not spontaneous, is it not? Most of the times in there has to be a cause or a predisposing factor for the uterus to invert, as we discussed, mishandling of the third stage of the labor or multigravida, or even a tonic PPH sometimes leads to uterine inversion. And it is not a spontaneous procedure, or a spontaneous spontaneous, what you call, an event. So in that case, if it were to be a spontaneous event, then each and every woman would have ended up in uterine inversion, is it not? So it's not a spontaneous event. So the answer here is B, that is acute. 19th question, which one of the following is not an operation for uterine inversion? O'Sullivan, Haultain, Spincely, or Fentany? Anybody with this answer? We had discussed about these procedures. I'll give you the answer here. It is Fentany. Okay. Fentany is not a procedure which is done for uterine inversion, whereas all these three are done. I haven't prepared actually the slide for, to make you understand what are these techniques, but we discussed about Haultain's in the previous slide. It's a surgical procedure. What they do in the Haultain's procedure is, I'll just go back to that slide here. Yeah. See, what you do in the Haultain's operation is here, once they kind of push the uterus back with the help of the left hand in the vagina, they push the uterus. So there will be a constriction ring in the cervix. The cervix would have kind of constricted here at this level. Okay. So what they do here, the cervical ring is incised posteriorly with a longitudinal incision. Posteriorly, the cervix is incised with a longitudinal incision, and the uterus is kind of pushed back. And the next of the procedures is similar to Huntington's method, and all the incisions are closed. And of course, uterotonics or the injections have to be given to see that the uterus gets contracted. Now, what is Huntington's method here? What they do is, in the Huntington's method, yeah, we are here. Huntington's repair is by traction on the round ligaments. So they pull up the round ligaments with the help of Alice forceps. They pull up, and then they tie it up together. They kind of reduce the length of the round ligaments and pull it up and they tighten the round ligaments and see that the uterus is pulled up. So that is called as Huntington's repair. So only the Haultain's additional step in Haultain's method, as we discussed, is that the cervical ring is incised posteriorly, and then it is followed by the same procedure as the Huntington's. That means they pull up, or traction is applied on the round ligaments, and they tie it up to the above. They tie the round ligaments to maintain the position of the uterus. So this is about two procedures. Now in O'Sullivan's method, what they do is, it is a hydrostatic method. That means they use warm saline, and it is run into the vagina with a high pressure by closing the labia. It is to prevent the leakage. So because of that high pressure, what happens is the uterus, which is inverted, is pushed back with the help of that pressure, which is generated by running a warm saline through the vagina. So that is called as hydrostatic O'Sullivan's method. So is it all clear to you all, the different types of techniques used in the management of uterine inversion?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. So the answer here is D, is not the procedure which is used for uterine inversion, that is Fentany's method.
Ma'am, where is Fentany used?
I'm not sure actually. So I'll get back to you on this because even I'm not sure. I couldn't really gather the information about this, but I'm sure that it's not in the uterine inversion. So in the next class, I'll definitely get back to you with regarding Fentany or even Spincely. Okay.
Okay, ma'am.
Right. So we'll proceed to the next question. Here, 20th. A 30-year-old woman, para 6, delivers vaginally following normal labor with spontaneous delivery of an intact placenta. Excessive bleeding continues despite manual exploration, bimanual massage, intravenous oxytocin, and administration of 0.2 milligram methergine IV. Which one of the following would be the next step in the management of this patient? A. Packing the uterus, immediate hysterectomy, bilateral internal iliac artery ligations, or injection of PGF2 alpha.
Injection of PGF2.
Yeah, understand the question properly, and they have asked, what is the next step in the management? They have not asked which is the ultimate management or the best management or whatever. They have asked the next step. So, as
Packing
the
of
situation
uterus.
given,
Packing the uterus.
I wouldn't agree with the packing the uterus. See, when they have given an option of injection of PGF2 alpha, you would always give the PGF2 alpha first, is it not? Before packing the uterus. Is it not? See, what they've given is in spite of giving oxytocin, in spite of giving methergine, she has the uterus has not contracted. And when you have an option of PGF2 alpha, you have a PGF2 alpha also, you have a option of packing the uterus also, then which one you will go first for? You'll definitely give, no, you will definitely give the PGF2 alpha first, is it not? Because it is much stronger drug when compared to even methergine or even oxytocin. The next stepwise management, if you think of, in without giving a PGF2 alpha, you will not go for a packing of the uterus or a surgical procedure like a bilateral internal artery ligation. You always think of the conservative procedures first or the medical management first. Then you go for mechanical management and surgical management. Understood? So in this series of questions, whatever answers, whatever they have given, in the next option for the management of such a situation, you will always give the PGF2 alpha first, because that's a wonderful drug. It's a very important oxytocic. So without giving PGF2 alpha, you will not directly go for mechanical procedures like packing the uterus or a late surgical procedures like iliac artery ligation or hysterectomy. Understood? So understand the question. You should understand the situation first and then understand the question. Like which one of the following would be next step in the management? That is what they have asked. They have not asked which is the best or which is the last, step in the management or whatever. So when you have an option, you always give the prostaglandin first or the PGF2 alpha, and then you, in spite of giving PGF2 alpha, that too, as I told, we can give multiple doses up till 8 maximum doses we can give at an interval of 10 to 20 minutes. Okay, and in spite of giving 3 to 4 doses, if still the patient does not respond, only you go to the next options in the management, that is mechanical methods like packing the uterus or balloon tamponades, etc., and as a last resort to the surgical procedures. But remember, you should be able to do all this in a very quick time, because as I told, in atonic PPH, there is very, very small interval of time which is available for us. We should act quickly, think quickly, decide quickly. It's a very, very tough situation to kind of, act upon. You really need a lot of help and logistics to kind of decide quickly and arrange, for the next possible option for this, for the such patients. So all of them have to be done simultaneously, quickly, and the decisions also need to be taken very quickly. But given this situation and given this question, of course, the next step, what you would do in such a situation is always you give a PGF2 alpha first, okay, and then you go for other options. So is it all clear to all of you?
Yes, ma'am.
There is no doubt, is it not?
No doubt, ma'am.
Okay, so we are already running through 8:15 and we have another 15 minutes time. I have another almost 20 more questions to follow on this topic only. Okay, so I can continue it in the next class, I feel.
Okay, ma'am.
So until then, if there's any doubt or if there's anything you people would want to discuss, you please let me know. We will continue the next questions in the next class, the next week. Okay, is there anything you want to know? I'll note down the doubt asked, that is Fentonese and Spinelli's. I'll come back to you on that in the next class for sure. Okay. Anything else you would want to discuss, students? Yes? So all of you are attending the class for the first time? The OBG class?
No, ma'am. Last class was the first class
Okay.
for me.
Fine. So is there anything you would want to ask or discuss or any suggestions? If you can come live on the video, it will be good so that, I can see you all and we will have a better interaction. We'll just keep the last 10 minutes for, discussion. Any doubts or any suggestions from you all, you can please come out openly. Yes? Yes, students? So shall I end up the class here so that we can meet up in the next class?
Ma'am, why in mechanical methods that it is inflated with saline? It is why the saline is used?
Yeah, here, see what is available in the labor rooms most of the times. See, we have to put some liquid inside there. Okay, and most of the times the normal saline is easily available. There is no kind of a scientific reason to use normal saline only, but it is the most commonly available fluid, and as you know, the normal saline is the least reactive to the body. So that is what is used, and it is kind of filled with the either in the Foley's bulb, or it is filled in the even in the condom sometimes, and we tie the condom to the Foley's catheter and push it intrauterine, and then we inflate with the normal saline. So there is nothing very scientific. It only acts by pressure. It just acts by pressure, blocking the openings of these uterine blood vessels on the uterine endometrium or the uterine surface. So that's the only mechanism how these tamponates or even the these mechanical methods will act.
Okay, ma'am.
Yeah. Yeah. Anybody else with any questions or anything you want to talk to? So have you have you attended the labor postings? So
Yes,
I'm sure
ma'am.
you must have seen at least few cases of postpartum hemorrhage. No. Okay.
No, ma'am.
Fine, but I would like to tell you that it's quite common, and at least in a busy labor room, we do have 1 or 2 cases every day. Mostly mild forms of PPH, which usually get controlled with oxytocics or your mechanical methods. Rarely a patient would go into a very severe variety of postpartum hemorrhage or atonic PPH, which would end up in surgical interventions like artery uterine artery ligations or the devascularization procedures or even hysterectomy is quite rare. But yes, they do occur, and even we have seen deaths occurring very faster because they're unable to provide timely intervention, especially lack of blood transfusion and the blood availability. And when the delivery is occurring in a remote area and there is no facility, and by the time the patient comes to your higher center where the blood and blood products are available, or a skilled setup is there to kind of salvage her life by surgical interventions. So we have seen many deaths occurring due to PPH, sadly. So yeah, it's quite a common thing. Mild to moderate is very common, whereas rare PPH is rare. I mean, the severe variety is rare, but of course, we need to be very cautious and prepared about that as well. Yes, any other doubts or any things you want to clear up? So shall we end it here, students, so that we can catch up in the next class? There are another 20 odd questions about the same topic, and we'll discuss each one in detail. So before you join to the next class, just brush up the theory part of the PPH as we have discussed, and then it will be easier for you all to answer the questions as well.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay. So thank you all so much. Have a good evening and good night, and we'll catch you up, all of you, in the next class. Please inform your friends, your colleagues about these classes, so that everybody can attend and take a benefit of it. And even we will have an increased strength and feedback from all of you. It will be a good interaction. So please inform your friends and other people as well.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all so much.
Thank you,
Thank
ma'am.
you.